Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Well, we read the plagues again. And no matter where we go, we're constantly coming back to those plagues. We talk about them, we read about them, they're part of our ritual, they're part of our holidays, and we struggle with them because they're not rooted in our cultural Judaism. They don't speak through our cultural understanding of how things work in the world and how God manifests in the world. There's these 10 events that baffle us, and we're not quite sure what we're supposed to do with them. And so we struggle over that because clearly Pharaoh and Egypt and what was going on in Egypt is evil, and it definitely challenges us about evil in the world. We do have a cultural and Jewish and Torah expression of how we deal with evil. We have an example in the Talmud of Rabbi Meir and his wife Bruria, and Rabbi Meir was constantly being robbed by highwaymen. Every time he would take a certain route, they would mug him and they would rob him, and he'd get injured and he'd come home, and it happened time and time again. And Bruria, his wife, overhears him praying to God, saying, God, kill them. I can't keep doing this time and time again. You've got to protect me, you've got to kill them. And Bruria hears the prayer and she says, no, that's inappropriate. We don't pray that. We pray that God helps them change. We don't pray that God actually does these hurtful things. That's our cultural understanding of how we encounter evil. Eradicating it by taking human life is our last resort. There are so many steps along the way. So we look at the plagues and we say, so what am I supposed to do with those plagues? What's going on? They don't speak to me because they don't speak through me. So how am I supposed to understand that? And in order to understand it, we look at the mission of what we were told. It's laid out at the burning bush. God comes and says to Moses, 2 things you have to accomplish. First thing is help get Israel out of Egypt. Great. Second thing is that Pharaoh and Egypt must recognize that this is the creating God, that God is God. That's actually the harder of the two, because you're asking people to change a worldview. You're asking them to change their mind. And even though we're sitting in the modern world, study after study after study tells us we don't know how to make people change their minds. We don't know what's involved. We actually don't know how you get someone to change the way they think. That's what's being determined at the burning bush. That's the part of the mission of what Moses needs to do. So when we then look at, okay, so what's going on in Egypt to accomplish the goals? Well, first of all, the plagues are huge. These are not subtle little things. It's not a burning bush. We're told, the sages tell us, that God communicates to the listener in the way the listener will best hear it. And that's why through Torah we see God changing the medium of communication. When God communicates to Moses at the burning bush, it's because Moses is a humble man. So we see a little bush is burning, a thorn bush, a little bush, because that's what Moses will pay attention to. That's what he will connect with. Pharaoh, a burning bush, a little bush, won't even see it. When we're talking about Pharaoh, we talk about grandeur. We're talking about a man who heads an empire in the ancient world that is the strongest empire. You're not going to reach him with subtle little messages. It has to be huge. It has to be grand in order for him to even pay attention or engage with it. Everything that's going on with the plagues is in a language aimed at Pharaoh. It's not aimed at us. That's why we don't get it. But when we look at it through the eyes of Pharaoh, oh my goodness, suddenly we understand what's going on. This is a clash of the titans. This is Pharaoh, who believes himself to be God, is engaging with Israel's God. It's going to be huge. And if I were to say, well, how would I describe a clash of titans? Here's how I would describe it. Blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, death. That's a clash of titans. That's when you get gods involved with each other and clashing with each other. So we go back to the burning bush and we say 2 goals. The first goal, get Israel out. That's easy. Just head to the 10th plague. We don't need the other 9. Head to death. That'll get us out. There's a million ways for God to get us out. That's the easy one to accomplish. It's that second goal. The one that says, get Pharaoh in Egypt to recognize this is God. For that, we cannot simply head to one plague. We need all 10, because all 10 are delivering one message. They're not delivering 10 messages. And even when we look at Maimonides' comment on the plague says, once they start, they will play out. You can't stop them in the middle. It's not 10 messages, it's one message. So when we look at them and we say, okay, first of all, who are they attacking? Well, most of our commentaries say they're headed to the gods of Egypt. Every one of those plagues is targeting one of the gods of Egypt. Great. So the God of Israel is defeating the gods of Egypt. I have a theological problem with that, because that's not going to get Pharaoh to recognize this is the creating God. That's going to get Pharaoh to agree that Israel's God can beat up the gods of Egypt. But it doesn't actually say that the gods of Egypt aren't gods. So it won't deliver the message. It's not good enough. Therefore, we're going to look deeper, and we're going to say the second step of these plagues. How do they manifest? Because we're given a lot of detail in Torah about how they're happening. Usually we look at what happens, who are they targeting? But we need to ask, how is it happening? Because that's what the Torah is giving detail about. So we'll take a look briefly at some of them. First of all, the first one, the blood plague, it's happening through water. That's the process. It's headed to the waters of Egypt. Then we look at some of the other details about how is it happening, and we notice that the text is telling us the plagues are separating the wild beasts from the tame field animals. That's part of the details in those plagues as well. And we'd have to ask, why did it just do that? Also, the language of some of those plagues. For instance, the boils. We're being told the boils are blossoming on the skin. And you're thinking, oh, wow, there's an image I didn't need. But the idea of using that verb, the verb of flowering, blossoming. We look at the locusts, and it tells us how are the locusts manifesting in Egypt. It says, quote, they are covering the eye of the land. So you can't see the ground at all, but the language, it covers the eye. And then we look at the end of it all, how are we told to commemorate it? We're told to commemorate it with a holiday that's called Pesach, and we're to actually celebrate the holiday for 7 days. And now we're sitting there thinking, 7 days? These plagues took way longer than what we could count in days. First of all, there were 10 of them, so at least if you one a day, even though many of them we know lasted much longer. What's with the 7 days? And suddenly we look at it, we tie it all up with all of that observation, and we see something we didn't see before. The plagues in their totality are undoing creation. One by one, they are undoing the first week of creation. Some of our clearest examples, again, the locusts. It says that it can't be seen. The land can't be seen because it covered the eye of the land. If we go back to Genesis and we look at how was the land created, we notice it actually wasn't created. It was revealed. We're told that the waters pooled together, revealing the land so we could see it. And now the locusts are covering the eye of the land. It's undoing what was done in Genesis. When we look at the creation of the sun and the moon, we're told in Genesis those are two separate lights that were created and placed into the sky above us so they could bring light down to us. Then we look at the plagues, and suddenly we look at hail. Hail is not a hail we can recognize at all, because the Torah tells us it's blocks of ice with fire burning inside of it, and it's raining down from above, and suddenly we're thinking, oh, look at that. It's bits of the sun contained within blocks of the moon that are now raining down onto the earth. The sun and the moon are undoing. They're now falling down in bits and pieces, and that undoes what was done in Genesis with the creation of the sun and the moon. It also tells us that the locusts are attacking the new growth that happens in Egypt. It's the opposite of the appearance of vegetation in creation. Because in creation, we're told over and over, everything that grows, grows with its seeds inside it. In other words, it grows already embodying the future. And now we're being told in the plague that the locusts are heading to eat the new growth. In other words, removing the future. There will be no future once they're done with it. And then we get to darkness, and the text tells us it's a darkness unlike any other darkness we will know. It is unique. It's a darkness you can touch. It's heavy. It presses on the person, and it lasts for 3 days. And then we look again at creation, and we know there's a primordial light. The very first thing God says is, Vayehi or, let there be light. And it's a light, the Midrash tells us, unlike any other light we will ever know or see. And how long does it last? 3 days. And so we've got them talking now in opposition to each other, undoing. And finally, that last plague, the death of the firstborn, is the opposite of Adam, the creation of the first human being. God breathing life into the first human being, God taking life from the firstborn. We're looking at it and suddenly we understand that God is returning Egypt to chaos. The conclusion is only the God who created the world would know how to undo it. And now the message is delivered. Now Pharaoh and anyone in Egypt will understand and see this must be the creating God, because this is the undoing of creation. You need all those plagues. Before the incident of Egypt, the text tells us over and over, I am the Lord your God who created the heaven and earth. And after we read of leaving Egypt, we hear the phrase, I am the Lord your God who redeemed you from Egypt. One phrase is replacing the other because the second event proves the first. The moment I say, this is the Lord who redeemed us from Egypt, I now have said, and I recognize this is the God who created heaven and earth, because I recognize what was going on in Egypt. By saying the second, I have affirmed the first. And that is why we are to celebrate Pesach for 7 days, because it is the 7 days of creation, so that we understand what it is we're celebrating, what it is we're affirming. We're told at Pesach that we have to eat matzah, but we're also told we have to get rid of the bread. It's 2 separate things we have to do. And suddenly we're focused on bread and leavened goods. And in fact, the Torah tells us, and if you eat it during those 7 days, karet, your soul is now cut off, disconnected. Some sages say starved. It is the most extreme statement that can be made in Torah. And we sit there and say, really, over eating bread? Why would it be so harsh? Every other week of the year, we eat bread. Friday, we eat challah. It's a big mitzvah. Suddenly, we're going to eat bread in these 7 days, and we're going to get the worst of the worst of the worst? Why? But when we understand the creation connection, we see that bread only appears in text when we're exiled out of the garden. By the sweat of your brow, you will make bread. And it's the first time the word is used. It does not appear in the first 7 days. It appears when we're out. So the idea of saying, but now I'm going to eat bread during the 7 days, that I am to understand its connection to the creating God and my acceptance of the creating God. Now, if we eat bread, the text is telling us we've denied the events of Egypt. And if we've denied the events of Egypt, we've denied God as the creator. And in fact, we've starved our soul. It's not a punishment, it's an outcome. The plagues don't speak from within our culture, but they do speak to us. The medium of the communication honors Pharaoh. His legacy will be that he engaged and fought with the creator of the universe. Of course he lost. This is the creator of the universe, but he fought to the end, and that's respecting him. For us, it's a reminder that proof of God lies everywhere in the world, all around us, all the time. It's there in what we see, and it's there in the hidden processes, in the mysteries that surround us, in the flow of nature, in the way the days hold hands with each other, in the new promises that lie in the earth we walk on and in the air we breathe. It is not an ancient text we just read of destruction. It's an internal text of inspiration.